So, in any battle, shonen, or martial arts manga, there's an inevitability that at some point there will be the infamous tournament arc. You know, the arc that will magically take our heroes to some dome or coliseum where they'll be forced to battle it out with other formidable opponents, and continue to advance in the tournament until they reach the finals and inevitably win and possibly get their quote-unquote prize. Think I'm lying? Think of your favorite anime or manga and I guarantee there is a tournament arc, either big or small. Baki, yup, you have the Maximum tournament and the Raitai tournament. One Piece, you bet, they have the Coliseum at Dressrosa. Yu Yu Hakusho, yep, they have one of the most well-known tournament arcs in manga with their Dark Tournament. And there's plenty more, like Dragon Ball Z, Fairy Tail, and even My Hero Academia. The list really does go on. The point I'm trying to make is that the tournament arc is an inevitability in any battle manga or anime. But I think there's one series that pulls this concept off better than any other series, and it's called Kengan Ashura. And the tournament is the Kengan Annihilation Tournament, which just so happens to be the entire series. It's an arc that spans over 200 chapters and starts and finishes so many character arcs. It's a masterclass in martial arts manga. And so without further ado, we'll take a deep dive into this masterclass of a tournament and tell you exactly why this is the best tournament arc ever. So here's the thing, any good tournament arc, and I'm going to say tournament so many times throughout this video, any good tournament arc needs to have a good setup, and Kengan Ashura isn't an exception. The setup is simple and effective. In this series there's a concept of Kengan matches, where basically there's a secret society in Asia where famous companies conduct business dealings through fights with their hired fighters. These fights are called Kengan matches, and if you want a deed to some land, there's a Kengan match. You want $1 million worth of shares? Well, you can organize a Kengan match. The point is, Kengan matches are the bread and butter of this society, and companies involved are considered the Kengan Association, the 100 or so companies that make up this association. While their fighters range from underground legends or public martial artists to just common street thugs. But for the premise of this story, the most important fact we need to know is that a Kengan Annihilation Tournament can be called if a company has enough endorsements from other association members, which can be won through, yup, you guessed it, Kengan matches. This tournament then decides the next chairman and basically the most powerful man in Asia. Our main character, Tokita Oma, just so happens to be employed by the company who has organized this tournament, and so he must win because the company that has organized the Annihilation Tournament must win, otherwise their company will dissolve. But our main character, Oma, and like most other fighters, could care less about the business dealings, and rather they care about being the strongest there is. This is also a good time to talk about our main character, Tokita Oma, a fighter who was raised in a lawless area known as the Inside, an area with the highest number of murders and crime rate imaginable. It got to the point where the Japanese government had simply ignored his existence and deemed it a lawless area. Here's where Oma learned how to fight and survive thanks to his master Tokita Nico, and after his master was murdered, he vowed to avenge his death and become the strongest there is. The manga tends to define Oma as a seeker type, a martial artist that doesn't fight for money or status, but rather simply to master their own path, to better himself and his martial arts, and I think that's a brilliant way to describe your main character, and it makes him so much more likable throughout the tournament. And for someone as disciplined as this, the Kengan matches are the perfect place for someone like him. And so with the Annihilation Tournament called, each company drafts their best fighter. Some go to the reliable fighters who have fought in countless Kengan matches, and some just pick an entirely new fighter. Each fighter confident that it can take out anyone who is put in front of them and become the strongest fighter in the association. It's a simple yet effective premise that gives us just the right amount of information to keep us invested while leaving enough questions to be answered. And what takes this setup and evolves it into something greater is none other than the fighters themselves. A great tournament needs great fighters. This seems like a given, but not exactly. I just don't mean great fighters, but rather fighters that come across as good enough to win or a legitimate threat to our main character. Because if they don't, there's no sense of accomplishment if they do. If our main character breezes through the tournament without any issues, then the win will just feel cheap. That sense of tension that legitimate fighters bring is a must. Kengan Ashura does well to set up its fighters prior to and during the tournament in order to make viable threats to winning the whole thing. First, we have the Fang of Metsuodo, the personal fighter of the current chairman who has remained undefeated for over 100 matches, and is the undoubtable favorite in any match he's in, a style that has no form and breaks the will of anyone he fights. There's the wild tiger of the Kengan matches, Wakatsuki Takeshi, the fighter who has the most wins in Kengan history with over 300 wins, a strong man who has a Superman syndrome where his muscles are 2 times that of a normal person. Or maybe Kiryu Setsuna, the man our main character has a personal grudge against with the mysterious martial arts that allows him to move swiftly and devastatingly capable of killing someone in one blow. This doesn't even cover all of the potential threats, but all of this information is conveyed to us with minimal explanation, but rather subtext and display of force. The fighters genuinely all seem like true contenders, and it wouldn't surprise us if any single one of them would win the whole thing. In contrast to the fighters, the next logical step is the fights themselves. Yes, obviously the most important aspect in any tournament arc is the fights. This can make or break the arc in many ways. If the fights come across as bland, then it fails to grasp its viewers. If the fights are maybe a little too long, then viewers may not be willing to stick around for more. I think Kengan Ashura has the sweet spot of short yet engaging fights for its tournament. In the simplest of ways, the fights that need to be long are long for the right reasons. The fights are short enough to not let you get bored and lose interest, but also long enough to demonstrate enough choreography and techniques to be extremely satisfying, and to not let you feel cheated on the result. Kengan Ashura is a martial arts manga, so you do get to see a lot of different martial arts like karate, aikido, and boxing, and also some fictional martial arts like the Kawan style and Oma's Nika style. Seeing each of these styles mesh together in these fights is very satisfying to watch, and the author takes great care to demonstrate the weakness and strengths of each in order to have a coherent battle with a satisfying conclusion. Like the nail-biting matchup of the world boxing champion and pound-for-pound #1 Gao Long, as well as the Aikido genius Kaneda. Here Kaneda spends his time looking to get the devastating throws and locks to immobilize Gao Long, playing almost a chess-like game with him, while Gao Long uses his lightning-quick jabs and strength to keep his distance and try to finish him off with his devastating right hand. Each of them are aware of their winning pattern and how they need to get to their quote-unquote checkmate. The most important thing that this fight tells us is styles make fights, like in the real world. Enough as though you can see someone who has ascended far into the tournament potentially losing to someone in the first round, mainly due to their choice in martial art. I always find myself thinking back to certain fights in the tournament and what would happen if another fighter was in that place. Maybe the entire scope of the tournament would change completely and we may have a different winner. It's obviously not news to anyone to say that these fights are one of the most fascinating aspects of the story, and anyone can beat anyone in any given day. An overlooked aspect in tournament arcs are the stories contained in each tournament. A good overarching story helps audiences gravitate towards various participants and keeps them wanting more. Kengan Ashura has multiple sub-stories happening throughout the tournament, as well as the main story revolving around Oma. I will say that Oma is probably one of the best characters to view the tournament through his perspective because the amount of growth and change his character undergoes throughout the entirety of the series. With him coming to terms with his own emotions, weaknesses, and life decisions help us root for him and so many others as a result. For example, let's look at his matchup between the deadly assassin Kure Ryan. The fight itself is probably one of the best of the series, but without spoiling too much of it, it really serves as a crossroads for Oma's character. Throughout the fight, he's confronted with so many emotions from his past to his current reality. He even summons a ghost-like figure of his master to knock some sense into him. In my opinion, he fights someone who could possibly be viewed as an alternate version of himself if he were to pursue a path of carnage for the sake of strength. But rather he finds himself leaning towards the path of martial artists, and truly adapts the teachings that he's gained from his master. And not to mention, the entire fight is a straight bloodbath and basically is just a kaiju movie. This fight basically encompasses everything I've talked about for the past few minutes. Two fighters who have clearly defined characters and motivations, who also have clearly defined martial arts styles that vary greatly. On one hand, an assassin with a very brutish style who'd rather use force to take out his opponent, and on the other hand, a true martial artist with finesse and strength by his side. A fight that takes us on a true journey about one's own reflection, but doesn't feel too long, and comes to a conclusion that is naturally reached and not forced for anyone. It's a fight that truly encompasses what Kengan Ashura is as a series. And the best part about it, it's not the only fight like this. There's so many fights with rich stories that happen inside and outside the tournament, all coming together to lead to the overarching story of this tournament where it takes place in the finals. I could truly go on for hours talking about each individual subplot that happens throughout the story, but I really do want you to experience every single aspect of this amazing story that is this amalgamation of a tournament. Everyone truly does have a satisfying conclusion to their story. It may not be the one you were looking for, it may not be the most happiest, but it is a conclusion that makes sense. I think a lot of times one of the mistakes that some shonen series do with the stories in the tournament is that it's overtly focused on the main character. And I don't think that's an inherently bad thing to do. For God's sakes, I'm not a mangaka, I don't write manga. But I think it goes a long way to invest and devote a lot of time on the side cast for tournaments to build up that overarching story. I'm a fan of it not being completely believable that the main character will always win every fight that they're in. I personally think that it's a good sign of a tournament if I'm rooting for other fighters outside of my main character, because that's how invested they've made me feel about these characters. Oftentimes when we're reading the story of Kengan Ashura, you sometimes forget who the main character is because a lot of time is devoted to building up these other larger-than-life fighters. Each of these fighters are the main characters in their own story. Salpong is trying to win the tournament in order to save his village from being torn down. Ray is a former assassin who gave up a life of killing out of love for his employer, and who he does not want to disappoint, so he will continue to win. Wakatsuki Takashi fights for a chance to finally get revenge on the one man who's handed him his worst loss, the Fang. Their will to win is perfectly conveyed throughout each of their fights and their respective stories, all amalgamating into the overarching story of this tournament. And as a side note, I've spent a lot of time talking about the fighters themselves and their overarching stories in the tournament, but a lot of time is spent on these business owners and their motivations. And it really does add another layer to these fights to see how much is riding on each individual fight, but just winning the tournament in general. Yamashita Kazuo, who is Oma's manager/owner, is a perfect example of these managers having a profound impact on the overall story. His story is something that runs parallel with Oma's journey throughout the tournament, and he comes to terms with a lot of his life decisions, which makes for another layer throughout all these fights. And he's essentially the second main character throughout this tournament next to Oma. I've essentially outlined 4 main categories that I think make a tournament arc great: the setup, the fighters, the fights, and the overall story. That isn't to say that there aren't any sub-factors within these 4, but these are the 4 that I think are necessary for a great tournament arc. Kengan Ashura is something that I think conveys these factors the best. I think it changes the game for tournament arcs based on how easily it hits these 4 factors. I have to say that as a martial artist myself, this is a series that had a profound impact on me. It perfectly encompasses the martial arts mindset between fighters and those who are fighting out of necessity, as well as those that just fight out of honor, or maybe those that just fight for the heck of it. The characters in Kengan Ashura feel raw and real, but also it's not afraid to add some comedy and supernatural aspects to it. It almost feels like a love letter to martial arts and martial arts tournaments. What's it like to fight through countless battles with no rest, how accumulated damage affects a fighter throughout a tournament, and the mental strain these fights have on people. It's a series-long tournament arc, and it's an impressive feat, and as you'd expect, it's one of a kind. And there you have it. Hey everyone, if you made it to the end, thank you so much for checking out my video. And if you're new here, please consider liking and subscribing for some more anime and manga content. I'm going to be more consistent throughout the year with uploading these longer form content. It's just that my personal job has been really ramping up this past year, but I will be more consistent now. We are so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers. I think we're at the 830 mark, so if we can hit there, it'll be amazing. And if you're interested in some more short-term content, please feel free to check out my TikTok as well as my shorts.